Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad to have you with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Yes, we've made it to the end of another week, another very busy week. Jim, you actually join us from the Big Apple today. So live from New York, it's Friday afternoon, I guess. But anyway, it's a little bit of a different venue, but glad we can finally put a bow on this week.
Yeah, and if anyone says this is, Jim sounds funny, it's because I'm not using the regular microphone. We're connecting several states apart. Shouldn't be too different, but don't worry, we'll be back to normal on Monday.
Yeah, speaking of back to normal, unfortunately, remember yesterday's Good Martini, or one of them was that there was a Hamas figure who was saying he agreed with the PLO and it was time to recognize Israel? Yeah, that was fun for 24 hours. Apparently, he's gotten a little bit of pressure, Jim, because now Musa Abu Marzouk has a new statement, of course, saying, "My words were taken out of context. I emphasize that the Hamas movement does not recognize the legitimacy of the Zionist occupation and does not give up any of the rights of the Palestinian people. The resistance will continue until liberation and return." So whatever glimmer of hope we thought there could have been yesterday, and we were pretty cynical about it in the long term, that got doused pretty fast.
Yeah, it's almost like he's, experienced a counter argument from his Hamas buddies, possibly at gunpoint.
That's just a quick follow-up from yesterday. Also, 4 Hamas members arrested yesterday in Europe, Germany, and the Netherlands. Seem to be plotting terrorist attacks against Jewish targets there. So good work by law enforcement, and keep your eyes open over there because there's probably more of them. Our Good Martini today comes from a piece that I believe came out yesterday morning in The Economist from James Bennet. If the name rings a faint bell, but you can't quite place it, he was the editorial page editor at the New York Times when the New York Times newsroom went nuts in the summer of 2020 because Bennet, in consultation with the editors and publishers of the New York Times, put out an op-ed by Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton during the riots that were engulfing Washington, D.C., saying it's time to bring in the troops to restore order in the city. And that did not sit well in the newsroom, even though there had been plenty of other editorials, he says, talking about defunding the police and very other left-wing ideas. But of course, they never remember those. It's a very long piece, but here are just a couple of the paragraphs that jump out about what he says about the culture at the New York Times now. He had been there before, and while it obviously leaned left, he thought, back in the 90s and early 2000s, it certainly still had that kind of objective journalism approach, which we could probably dispute. But now he says it's completely different. He says the Times problem has metastasized from liberal bias to illiberal bias, from an inclination to favor one side of the national debate to an impulse to shut debate down altogether. All the empathy and humility in the world will not mean much against the pressures of intolerance and tribalism without an invaluable quality that Sulzberger, the publisher, did not emphasize: courage. For now, to assert that the Times plays by the same rules it always has is to commit a hypocrisy that is transparent to conservatives, dangerous to liberals, and bad for the country as a whole. It makes the Times too easy for conservatives to dismiss and too easy for progressives to believe. The reality is that the Times is becoming the publication through which America's progressive elites talks to itself about an America that does not really exist. And then later on he says, what still seems most striking about the Cotton episode is how out of sync the leaders of the paper were with the ascendant illiberal values within it. Cotton's essay brought into focus conflicts over the role of journalism that had been growing within the Times for years, and that the leadership has largely ducked away from. Is it journalism's role to salt wounds or to salve them, to promote debates or to settle them, to ask or to answer? Is its proper posture humble or righteous? And so, it's pretty clear throughout that he's, pretty liberal himself, but he understands the way journalism ought to be. I think it's kind of the Barry Weiss approach to being a person who trends left politically, but sees journalism differently than the rising generation does, Jim. So how important is this piece from Bennet?
It really pulls back the curtain on the culture of the New York Times that we don't get to see behind the creation of the finished product that's printed out, put on the web and on paper every day, that we do get to see. It basically says, every conservative suspicion is confirmed. And it's confirmed by someone who is not some conservative outsider, but somebody who was a left. By the way, this is the brother of Colorado Democratic Senator Michael Bennet, Throughout his career, he said he never covered his brother. That he recused himself from any coverage decisions about relating to that. But this is you read his column in the Economist. This is not a right of center guy. This is a left of center guy, but I'd say center left. And again, throughout this essay, it becomes very clear he has very traditional, old-fashioned ideas of what the role of the news and journalism is. And there are all kinds of little anecdotes in this that I think illustrate why the New York Times has gone so far afield of what that traditional mission is. There's an unnamed conservative columnist at the New York Times, Brett Stevens. We don't know who it is. That's just my speculation of who it is. And basically, there's a recommendation from a staffer that this conservative columnist's columns run with a trigger warning. Warn readers that they are about to encounter something that may upset them. And also separately, that the idea that apparently this conservative columnist complains and says that I'm being edited by a different standard, I'm being judged by a different standard, I'm being treated by a different standard compared to all of my left of center colleagues. And it goes up to Silberger, and basically the attitude is, yeah, he is, and he should just learn to live with it. The idea that the New York Times does have a different standard for conservative voices on the op-ed page than it does for the liberal progressive pages. And they're fine with it. And they're they won't tell it to readers, but within the building, it's very clear that there's that. It does leave me wondering how Brett Stevens and Ross do that and other folks like that feel working there, with that kind of attitude. But the other sentence that, I've seen the most people quoting and talking about, that really just is, a shiv to the gut and a good twist, is that, quote, "The reality is the Times is becoming the publication through which America's progressive elite talks to itself about an America that does not really exist." Now, maybe you can find this kind of phenomenon in some corners of conservative media, but I think it's easier to be a liberal and ignore and really never encounter conservatives than to be a conservative and never encounter or deal with liberals. Because liberals are, Biden's in the White House, still have the Senate, academia, we've seen what's happening on college campuses, news, the bubbles of the left are bigger and more hermetically sealed, I would argue, because conservatives are always responding and reacting to what liberals are doing. Somebody can argue with that with me, but you want to dispute that, fine. But I think it's very safe to say that the vision of, you remember the New Yorker cover, how the world looks to a New Yorker, and it was this kind of funny, perspective that had, a New York street in great detail, and then the rest of the country beyond was this big empty space, and maybe you had like the Sears Tower for Chicago and Golden Gate Bridge, but the rest of the world was like New York matters, and everything else out there, particularly flyover country, does not matter. And he's saying that's the mentality of the New York Times, and that the America that they cover is not really the America that really exists. And unsurprisingly, I think if you look at the world this way, you're always going to end up with solutions that aren't going to fit, that aren't going to work, because you're not taking the whole country into account. So I think that that's in a nutshell, that if you saw the whole country clearly, you wouldn't pursue a hard left agenda, because you're like, well, this is just, it's not going to play in Peoria, so to speak. It's not going to work. There's a huge chunk of the country that isn't ready to go on board with this. And you can either try to change their minds and move the country in a particular direction, or you can accept it and you can accept half a loaf, or you can pursue a more centrist or even center-right direction. Anyway, it's a really good essay. I'd recommend listeners, put aside some time. Yes, it's really long, but if this is the sort of thing that interests you, this is Bennet's definitive account of his time there and what has gone so wrong at the quote-unquote paper of record.
I also think another issue here, especially with how the newsroom threw a hissy fit over the Tom Cotton op-ed, is that, we've been kind of snickering for a while over safe spaces on campus and, not having certain speakers on campus because that would be triggering. And even, I think at one point we had a crazy martini years ago on needing puppies and pillows and bubbles for students if they happen to confront an opinion they don't agree with. And for the most part, leftism on campus has been a big deal since the 60s. But until recently, the far left idealism got smacked in the face by the real world once they left college. And so they kind of adjusted to the real world. But now they're bringing that into the real world, and the same type of mentality in which administrators coddled them on campus, that seems to be happening now in the workplace, in the newsroom, and so forth. And so there's no more splash of cold water in the face of these people. They're still being coddled and they're still being empowered. And now these people are getting older and calling the shots in a lot of these places.
Yeah, I mean, look, I never liked the proposal for, well, we need national service. We need something to give young people the right kind of experience. Having this ordered from top down, enforced by the government, is not going to work particularly well. But I do think that, one, back in the days of the draft, people would interact with the military, at least those who, couldn't get out of the draft. I spent a summer working in a warehouse loading medical equipment onto trucks. It was not fun, but I was encountering and working with people who relatively coddled, and I realized overprotected, perhaps naive suburbanite kid was not usually interacting with. And I just kind of think that's good for you, just for your perspective. But if you want to be a journalist, it's really good to know how people who don't live the way you do, probably don't have the religious beliefs you do, probably don't have certainly don't have the political beliefs you do a different thing for a living, prioritize, have different values. Like, it's good to know these people, so you don't see them as like space aliens. And it's just kind of fascinating that so many people in the New York Times and some of the more elite circles of journalism go straight from the Ivy Leagues, get internships at these, high-end papers, and really never encounter anybody outside of their relatively privileged world. And of course, then they think they know what's right for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he also had a good point about the death of smaller papers. And so that's kind of a proving ground before you bring people up to the big papers. And now, like you said, it's a direct pipeline from college. And it's not making things better in terms of how the news is done. All right, let's talk about a fantastic sponsor now, and that is Provia. If you're one of the millions of American men or women of any age dealing with premature hair thinning and loss, there's now a real solution that delivers on its promise without the harsh side effects, unwanted chemicals, and there's also no need for a prescription. Provia. New customers of Provia save over 50% plus get free shipping on Provia's introductory package at proviahair.com/martini.
Provia supports healthy scalp circulation, delivers nourishing nutrients, and healthy hair follicle anchoring to your scalp. It's effective for men and women of any age, and it is safe on colored, treated, or styled hair.
Yeah, so if you're dealing with millennials or Gen Z that make you want to pull your hair out and it actually is coming out, this is your solution. Don't wait. Order now and save an extra 10% off just in time for the holidays at proviahair.com/martini. That's PROVIA hair.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our bad/crazy here. We had talked a number of times about young people in D.C. Man, the young people are really taking it on the chin today on the 3 Martini Lunch. But we had the Hill staffers who went public demanding that their bosses demand a ceasefire, which they didn't really have the power to do either in a different country in the legislative branch. But never mind that. Then there was the White House intern letter demanding a ceasefire, at which point we said, well, if you really don't like the policy, you can always just quit. But now there's some more intrigue into this. The Politico playbook on this, first of all, apparently there's a GroupMe chat for the White House interns, not run by the White House, but they kind of have it organized. And then this letter apparently got started when a user that nobody knew named Thara Nagarajan, if I'm saying that correctly, popped in and said, "Hi all, as the genocide of Palestinians continues, there's a public letter for White House interns to sign anonymously for those who stand with Palestine." And then the link to the letter was dropped in, and then Thara immediately jumped out of the chat. So a lot of mystery about who this person is, how they got into the chat, and who they might be working for. The Washington Post, meanwhile, is suggesting that the anonymous signatures on the letter might not be real either, although the Politico story does anonymously quote at least one person, an intern who did sign the letter. So I'm not sure why you would sign it if it comes from such a mysterious source, even if you agree with it. But the weirdness continues with this story, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, in this Politico story, it says the White House does not run the intern GroupMe, GROUP, which serves as an informal way for the roughly 150 20-somethings to stay in touch throughout the course of their program. Greg, end quote. Greg, that strikes me as a terrifying national security risk. It's one thing if you and your White House interns are, you meet at the coffee shop down the street and you're chatting, is there a chance somebody overhears them? Yeah, there's not much you can do about that. But having an electronic system where 150 people who work in the White House every day, I imagine you go to become a White House intern, you have to go through at least the basic, security clearance. And you're probably not handling tons of classified information, but you're working in the White House. You no doubt are hearing and seeing things that the average person does not have access to, and it could have national security implications. Even the president's schedule can have, national security implications. This really does look and sound like whoever Thara Nagarajan is. Like, anybody could just pop into this White House chat group and start spreading ideas and start telling people what to do. I'm glad that there are some White House interns who apparently went to their bosses and said, hey, this person popped up and, wants us to sign this petition, and all that stuff. But this sounds, like, one, it's conceivable that this is some foreign intelligence service that has figured this out and decided to stir up some trouble. We don't know who that is, but that certainly sounds like the Russian MO. Certainly would not be beyond the realm of Chinese or some other hostile force. Or maybe just somebody trying to make trouble. Or maybe it's maybe it's an American citizen who just really loves the Palestinian cause and wanted the White House interns to do this. But this basically says that we've got, of the roughly 150 20-somethings who are White House interns, a significant chunk of them seem really naive, seem really gullible. And that's kind of frightening in all of this. Again, I don't think anybody expected the White House to change its policy because of a petition by the White House interns. You might even say that that's a foreign and a ill-informed foreigner's perspective of who actually has power in the White House. This does not make anybody in the Biden White House look good, and kind of seems unnerving for reasons of security and just the sheer gullibility of people who are apparently roughly 40 of them who signed this letter, never having heard or met Nagarajan, and who thinks, okay, let's just sign this thing. I almost want to send these guys, I am a Nigerian prince. If you send me just a few $1,000s, I will be able to give you millions, and see how that goes.
It's exactly the example I was going to use. Yeah, it's totally gullible. What would be fun is if Thara was part of the administration and trying to smoke out which interns were trying to undermine him underneath. I don't know if they're that cloak and dagger over there, but the fact that anybody, we get this warning in our company email all the time. Don't click on stuff from people you don't know. You don't know exactly what it's going to do to your network and so forth. So the fact that all these supposedly tech-savvy young people would be like, I don't know who that is. They've never been here before, and they just left. But let's click on this and sign it. What could happen? All right, let's talk about something way better than gullible interns, and that is Omaha Steaks. The burgers of Omaha Steaks. Mrs. Columbus just cooked them up the other night. So good. Such good-sized burgers. I always have 2 cheeseburgers, but man, those were, first of all, very delicious, but they are a full meal, let me tell you. And Omaha Steaks not only sends you the burgers, of course, they've got the butcher cuts filet mignons, the jumbo franks, and also several other easy-to-prepare meals. And now, go to omahasteaks.com and take advantage of 50% off site-wide, plus use the code Martini at checkout and get an additional $30 off your order. Look, Christmas is barely more than a week away now. You know people who would love to get Omaha Steaks for the holidays. Go ahead and do it. Make their day, make their Christmas. Hurry. This sale ends soon, though. Visit omahasteaks.com and save big with 50% off site-wide. Plus, use the promo code Martini at checkout to get that extra $30 off your order. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code Martini at checkout. Minimum order may be required. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And for that, we go not too far away from where you are up in the Big Apple, but all the way up the Acela corridor to Boston, where the young mayor of Boston is on the defensive after it was revealed that they were holding an elected officials of color party. So what happened is that it was supposed to be sent to the minority members of the city council. It ended up getting sent to the entire city council, and apparently that's how we know that this existed. The email invite for an electeds of color holiday party was sent out by a city employee asking for RSVPs and dietary restrictions from council members who plan to attend the event. Now, Mayor Michelle Wu was asked about this, and here was her explanation for what happened.
I think we've had individual conversations with everyone so people understand that it was truly just an honest mistake that went out in typing the email field, and I look forward to celebrating with everyone at the holiday parties that we will have besides this one as well. So it is my intention that we can, again, be a city that lives our values and create space for all kinds of communities to come together.
Jim, obviously the question becomes, if you had a white members only party, I think the reaction would be pretty strong. So is that a fair comparison or not?
No, I think it's absolutely a fair comparison. And I really don't like this whoopsie, sorry about that. It is kind of ironic that this is occurring in Boston, which has a pretty notorious history of having less than ideal race relations for a long time. A lot of people said, "Oh, look at this enormous breakthrough in that we now have an Asian American woman as the mayor of Boston." I looked over at Howie Carr's column at the Boston Herald. He's already beaten me to all the good jokes here. She's just trying to put the party back in apartheid. Or the argument, it's a holiday party. Do they play I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas? All kinds of things like that. But really, the idea that somebody within the mayor's orbit thought that it was okay, and to say that, we're going to have this party and that only those of color may attend. Maybe the idea was that later they'd have a separate but equal party for the white members of the city government or something like that. It's a really dumb idea, but I think when you have this race-obsessed, they used to refer to this as bean counting. The idea when you see people explicitly through the lens of race, and that's all you see, this is where you inevitably end up with this idea of so, because we like this group more than that group, we're going to have a party, and only these folks are going to be here because the very presence of whites is somehow bothersome or suppressive or bad in some way. She's getting a lot of grief for this. I think she should be getting a lot of grief for this. And I don't like this oopsie tone. I really think she should say, oh, no, this is a terrible decision. The person who proposed it is going to be reprimanded. You can't just run around saying, oh, this is the good kind of segregation. This is the good kind of separating people out and saying one group of people cannot attend because of the color of their skin. So, but yeah, that's where we are. The good news is Boston has gone from discriminating in favor of whites to discriminating against whites without ever pausing in between to not discriminate against anybody.
I don't know. I don't know if that's considered progress. It's just considered putting the wrong factors as your priorities, I think. But
usually at least a little bit of time, that pendulum is in the middle as it's swinging back to the other direction. But that's where we are.
I don't know. They like Tom Brady. I don't know. He was white. Anyway.
Brady's like, hey, don't blame me. I went to Tampa Bay.
Jim, good luck getting home, and have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Also, while you're thinking about it, please go and give us a 5-star rating or a kind review. That really does help us out a lot. And also, you can get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific weekend and join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.